Hello Internet, what is going on? So, question, what is the ultimate problem? So this is a question I've come to after digging into this week's wandering journey, the path I've taken. And the path I decided to research this week is reinforcement learning. But more specifically, or more broadly, I wanted to understand how are we trying to solve intelligence and how that could potentially be the ultimate problem. And if we solve that, we solve everything. And I wanted to see where we're at in the cutting edge. So I dove deep into reinforcement learning. I wrote a post about it. So go read the post if you want to. Tons of links in there, resources, and a bunch of interesting things I've come across. And the way the post is structured is very simple. So first I start out basically talking about an intro to reinforcement learning, what it is, how it exists, all that stuff. And then below that I talk a bit about the jargon. So I kind of not debunk, but simplify a lot of the jargon within reinforcement learning, because this is something I've noticed over the past, I'd say, year or year and a half. When diving into the machine learning and data science world, you quickly find out that there's tons of jargon and tons of mathematical formulas, but once you can actually speak the lingo, then everything becomes a lot simpler. So what I do in the second piece of this post is I only take a few pieces of jargon that are used most often in the reinforcement learning space and try to simplify those to a human understandable way. And then after that, I go into the gaps of reinforcement learning. So we've made tons of advancements. We've done amazing things in the space. We've basically surprised ourselves with how great we can and how many great things we can do with this. So in that specific piece of it, I talk about some of the gaps and some of the obvious things that we need to solve to reach general AI. And in the post, I also kind of simplify and explain the difference between narrow and general AI. After that, I go into basically why I think this is the ultimate problem, and why I think solving intelligence and being able to kind of understand how we humans are so successful in everything that we do, and being able to kind of dissect the brain and figure out exactly how it kind of mechanically works, is the problem that if we solve that, we solve everything. So that's kind of the structure of the post. So as usual, I'm not going to explain the entire post in this video, but I would like you to go read it if you want to. But here I'm going to touch on a few things that I thought were interesting that I've come across, and hopefully help you understand what reinforcement learning is. So I first want to start off with a simple analogy around reinforcement learning, because it sounds complex, but it really isn't. And the origination of reinforcement learning and kind of why it exists the way that it does is that all these really smart scientists and mathematicians, computer scientists, etc., are basically trying to mimic what humans do in machines. And they're doing that through basically observing humans and watching how they live their lives. And we humans in our world, we basically go around doing things, so taking actions to different areas. And when we're taking those actions, we're getting rewards or punishments back. So we're getting acknowledged in good ways, or we're getting acknowledged in bad ways for what we do. And when we do that, we learn from that experience and we continue to evolve over time. That's exactly what reinforcement learning is. It's basically putting a thing inside of a world and then saying, do stuff, and this thing does stuff, and as it does stuff, it gets rewards and punishments, aka reinforcement, to the actions that it takes within the world that it is. So it's very simple. It's basically learning through reinforcement. You're being reinforced to do something or not to do something, and you're learning to build that way. So some simple jargon to kind of lay the fundamentals of reinforcement. I wanted to review a few words that you'd probably come across if you researched this and came through some intro blogs or intro videos. And some of the jargon you'll come across first is agent. So agent is you and me. So it's either a robot, it's a person, a baby, whatever. So it's a thing inside of a world, right? That's agent. The next one we'll go with environment. So environment is the holistic realm of the place that you live. So for us, that would be the planet. So the planet is our environment. It's everything. Everything that we know, everything we see, everything we've ever known, basically. That's the environment. And then the next one is state. So state is a subset of the environment. So my current state right now is looking at this phone, this tripod, and this desk, right? So this is my current state of what I can see. My environment is secluded around the planet, but this is all in my state. So that's state. The next one could be an action. So action basically means the thing that you do to interact with the state that you're in. So I'm currently in my state with this phone and this tripod, and I'm talking to a phone. So that is an action that I'm doing. I'm talking. And the reward is the next one. So reward is a positive or negative reinforcement of what I'm doing. So if I have an empty coffee cup and I want to get more coffee, so I take an action to get more coffee, and after taking that action, my reward would be a hit of caffeine. So that's the reward. And by taking that reward, I'm more likely to get more caffeine because it's a positive reinforcement loop. So that's reward. And the last one I'll tell you, and you can find many, many more pieces of jargon in this area, is policy. So policy is basically the agent's strategy to act with the environment around it. So the agent has a policy to do a certain thing to get a certain reward. And an example could be the cup analogy I just talked about. So my policy and my strategy is if I want to have more energy and I want to have a hit of caffeine, I will get more coffee and put it in my cup. That's my overall policy, my strategy. Those are just a few pieces of jargon that you'll come across. There are many, trust me. There's plenty, but that'll get you started. It's kind of just a baseline. Once you get the baseline, then you can kind of dive in a bit deeper. Now let's go to some of the more obvious gaps that showed up when I was researching reinforcement learning, because there's, like I said, tons of advancements. So they have AlphaGo, AlphaZero. We're looking at really, really complex battle games that have basically an infinite number of states and observations. So there's tons of advancements, but there also are quite a few issues. And I wanted to touch on two here. So one non-technical, but still important, and one technical. So the technical one is called the credit assignment problem. And the interesting thing is, when researching reinforcement learning, you actually see a lot of connections between what we humans do, what we humans deal with, philosophy around life, that directly correlates to reinforcement learning with these machines, because they're basing their stuff off of what they observe from us. So it's really interesting to see this dynamic between the two worlds. But the credit assignment problem is basically, if I take a series of actions, so if I take, say, 200 actions, right? And I get my reward and I achieve my ultimate goal. So there's an ultimate goal for me to basically win this game. But if I've taken 200 actions and I've won the game, how do I know which action I've taken in those 200 actually has the biggest impact on me winning? And the credit assignment problem is basically assigning credit to the action I've taken with the highest value. So that's kind of the credit assignment piece. And this is something that we interestingly enough have an issue with as humans consistently. And one thing that glaringly popped up in my head was when people see someone that's quote unquote succeeded in life, so they've gotten money, status, a lot of acknowledgement from other people, whatever it is, you ask that person, how did you succeed? What's your secret? How did you do whatever? And hopefully this person is humble and self-aware, but most usually aren't. They usually point to hard work, they point to determination, they point to grit, they point to all these things, and yeah, they have an impact. Those are one of the actions that make you kind of get to your ultimate goal, but most of the time it's luck. So that's an issue with we humans. We have a credit assignment problem with assigning the highest value to the actions you've taken to succeed. So credit assignment problem is a big issue in reinforcement learning, so you should Google it and check it out. Another one, the non-technical one that I wanted to talk about, is picking the right reward function. And this is called, I think, the control problem. And Stuart Russell recently wrote a book called Human Compatible AI. And he emphasizes the issue with this problem. And Stuart Russell is quite prominent in the realm of kind of existential risk around AGI, artificial general intelligence, coming to the rise quickly. And this community of people in the existential risk community, they focus on basically making sure that we mitigate as many risks as possible to have a utopian world with AI instead of a dystopian world of AI. And the point that he makes around this book is the control problem. And the premise of this is that with these reinforcement algorithms that we're creating, these machines, these agents, we're giving them an objective and then we're telling them to achieve it. But the thing is, we humans really actually don't know what we want. We think we know what we want, but we actually don't necessarily know what we want. And let me explain this through an example. One that came to mind is climate change. So if you as a human tell your agent, your machine, your super intelligent agent, you say, listen, we have this issue with climate change. I want you to solve it. I want you to help fix it so we no longer have to deal with this. So I'm sure there will be a lot more detail around it and you'll explain all these stipulations and things like that. But what if this agent says, okay, well, let me reverse engineer the problem? And it gets down to the point where it realizes that, okay, the reason so much carbon is being emitted into the air right now is because humans are emitting a bunch of additional carbon on top of what we already do naturally. And it says, okay, well, to solve that issue, I just get rid of the humans. And then problem solved, climate change is gone. But in the midst of that, how they got to that objective and achieving that goal is they kind of wiped out humanity. And that's like a simple, silly example, but you can extrapolate from that example many other situations where we humans try to identify an objective and say, this is what I want you to achieve. And we don't necessarily think through all of the ramifications of what could happen getting to that objective to us and how we could be harmed. So this book basically goes around and talks about how we should have machines observe us humans, and after observing us for a while, then it kind of builds out an understanding of what we truly want instead of what we're saying we think we want. So that is another problem. So the control problem is the non-technical one, and the technical one is the credit assignment problem. So there are many others. I highly suggest you look at the post if you want to see some more, and Google around and you'll find plenty. And the last point I want to make here is basically why I think this is the ultimate problem. And I want to start with a quote from an individual named I.J. Good. And I.J. Good was a cryptologist that worked with Alan Turing and a couple others, and he was quite a popular individual back in the day. And so this quote is kind of a small piece of a larger quote, but you kind of get the gist of it is, the first ultra-intelligent machine is the last invention that man need ever make. And the idea around that is that if intelligence and our brain and our ability to think through, communicate, and come up with ideas is what separates us from all other species on the planet, if we're able to artificially create something that can do that just as good as us and then many times better, then we no longer need to invent anything because we've created something that can invent on our behalf. And it's like the ultimate tool because we could potentially, and I know this is sci-fi and kind of really far out there, but if you created something that was 100 times, 1,000 times, 1,000,000 times more intelligent than a human, then you've basically figured out a way to solve all of the massive problems we have today, climate change, space colonization, life longevity, all these things. You've created something that can fix that. And any additional problems we have in the future. And yes, I agree, there are many negatives and downsides to this because if you create, and this is what most of kind of the different parties talk about within the AI community. So there's the utopian kind of practical, pragmatic side, and then there's the dystopian side. And I think there needs to be a balance because I've seen recently that there's a lot more of fear-mongering and dystopian stuff around how we could create an AI that kills us, and that is a concern, and we should definitely consider that. But I think we should also think more about how beneficial and how great this could be if we created it in the right way. So having, I think, a balance is pretty important. But yeah, so I think if we were able to create an artificial brain that could solve our problems, it's basically the root of, it's the root cause of all of our problems, is us. We are the root cause of all of our problems, mainly. So being able to kind of solve that root issue, it's a knock-on effect to everything else. I hope you'd enjoyed this shorter video. And let me know if you have any topics that you're interested in hearing more about. Feel free to subscribe to my newsletter if you're interested. It'll be somewhere in the post or on my website. And let me know if you have any feedback on this. This is a super interesting topic, really, really deep. You can go deep fast and get overwhelmed quickly. But if you can kind of look past the details and kind of see the intuition, I think it'll be a super interesting thing for you to kind of to grasp. So, Internet, I will see you next time.